Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to Hope for Your Heart. This is Pastor Calvin Corbett. So glad that you are joining me today for part 2 of Psalm 139. And here's my bad dad joke to get us started, okay? Where did the computer go? Somebody says, I don't know where the computer went. He's ransomware. Like ransomware. Okay. That was really bad. Forgive me for the bad dad joke, but I'm so excited about Psalm 139. This is such a wonderful psalm. As a matter of fact, it is such a powerful psalm that maybe we ought to go ahead and read the psalm today. And we learned a lot about it yesterday. We learned that God is omniscient and God is all-knowing. Those are the first two character traits that we saw in Psalm 139. But let me go ahead and read the entire psalm to you. It won't take very long. It's a short psalm. And David says, Lord, verse number 1, you have searched me. Lord, you know me. You know when I sit and you know when I rise. That's good, right? You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You're familiar with all my ways. Before a word on my tongue was formed, you knew it completely. Verse number 5, you hem me in, and behind and before, you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to obtain. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day. For darkness is as light to you. For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that fully well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Oh, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I were to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I am awake, I am still with you. If only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. They speak of you with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. Do I not hate those who hate you, Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you? I have nothing but hatred for them. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting. May the Lord bless the reading of his word as we look at this amazing subject of the attributes of God. We learn, first of all, that God knows everything about me. That is, God is omniscient. Now, we just read his word, and so we've gained some new information, some new knowledge about who God is. Now, in order to understand this, there is a level of knowledge that God has that we will never experience because he is all-knowing. Now, we can increase our knowledge, but we'll never be on the same level as God. I guess if we could be on the same level as God, we would become God. And so many people are trying to become their own God, and they are failing miserably because they don't know everything. I guess maybe the way we can put it is, I have a dog. Well, I guess I should say this is my wife's dog. And we got this dog, and it's kind of it's a beautiful dog, right? It's an English Golden Retriever. It sheds constantly all year round, and so there's fur balls all throughout my house. No matter how many times I sweep up, I still will find more fur balls. And so my wife loves this dog. He's a good-natured dog. So we got this dog because I thought it'd be a good therapy dog for my son who has autism. Well, come to find out, my son Seth could take the dog or leave him. He doesn't really have any affinity toward this dog. But my wife loves Gilbert. And so Gilbert is doing wonderfully as a therapy dog for my wife. She loves him, and he's something else. And so we've tried to teach Gilbert a few tricks. And I guess he's not real good at learning tricks. He can sit on command and maybe lay down on command, but that's about it. He can obviously fetch. He's a retriever, but that's about the extent of his tricks, right? And so he's gained a little bit of knowledge, but there's still this big gap between where we are and where he is. Now, we can close in that gap by trying to teach him some more information and give him some more information, but there's always going to be a gap between where he is and where we are. Now, when you think about our relationship with God, there's always going to be a gap between where we are and where he is. Now, we can close in that gap a little bit by learning more about him, by studying his word, by gaining more wisdom. And James tells us if we lack wisdom, we should ask of God, and God will give it to us. And he gives it to us generously. He gives it to us without finding fault, and would ask unwaveringly without doubting, because James says if we ask for wisdom but we doubt, we're not going to get it from the Lord because we're double-minded and we're unstable in all of our ways. And it says, don't let that man think that he shall receive anything from the Lord. Why? Because he's double-minded, unstable in all of his ways. So God gives a level of knowledge to us based upon our level of obedience. He's not going to reveal new truth to you until you first obey the truth that he's already revealed to you. And so no matter how much we know about God, and we should strive to know him better, we can close in that gap, but we're never going to be omniscient. David says, God searched me, and he knows me. He knows when I sit. He knows when I rise. He knows my thoughts even before I think them. He discerns what I'm going to say even before I say it. He knows my lying down, my getting up. He's familiar with all my ways. Even before a word came out of my tongue, you knew it completely. You hem me in behind and before. You lay your hand upon me. And he says, this knowledge, it's too wonderful for me. It's too lofty for me to obtain. And then we learned yesterday that David says that he can't hide from God because God is omnipresent. Wherever he goes, God's already there. He can change locations, but God is everywhere. He says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I go from your presence? I can't hide from the presence of God. No matter where I go, he is there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, he says, even there your hand is guiding me. No creature is hidden from God's sight. I love how Paul reminds the Hebrew believers of that. I say this often, that secret sin really is open scandal in heaven. You can hide your sin, but you cannot run from it. You cannot get away from it. It's right there. No creature is hidden from his sight. Let's look at the third trait of God, and it's found in verses 13 down through 18. God created me. God knows me. He knows all about me. I cannot hide from him because he's omnipresent. And number 3, he created me. Verse number 13, you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I love how that is termed. I remember my mom, when I was growing up, both my mom and my grandmother and my sisters were into knitting and crocheting, and they were always knitting something, right? And my mom is ADHD, and I think she would always do these little projects because she had to have something to occupy herself, right? She just always doing something. David likens that God has knitted him together in his mother's womb. And he says, I'm going to praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And he says, this is amazing how God created us to exist in the climate that he created, in the environment that he created, placed us in the family that he placed us in. And David says, these works are wonderful. He says, I can see these works. He says, I know these works. He says, my frame was hidden not from you when I was made in the secret place, because you were weaving me together. Not only did God know about my birth and know about how I was created at the time of conception, he was involved in that process. Verse number 16, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. And now that's amazing to me. My history was written even before I was born. How precious to me are your thoughts. How vast is the sum of them. He said, if I were to count them, think about all the thoughts that God has about us. David said, if I would sit down and I were to count these thoughts that God has, they would outnumber the grains of sand. And then he says, when I'm awake, you are still with me. Now, when God created us, it's so important for us to remember, according to Genesis 1:27, God created man in God's image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. As a result of this wonderful creation that God had created in us, we are his workmanship. Now, we love Ephesians 2:8-9. If you share the gospel with people, you will bring yourself to Ephesians 2:8-9 to remind people that we cannot get to heaven by good works. No matter how hard we try, we will fall short. Ephesians 2:8-9 tells us that we are saved by grace. For by grace are you saved through faith, and not of your own good works, lest we should boast. Why is it so important for us to know we can't get to heaven by good works? Because good works are not sufficient enough to get us to heaven. And Paul says, if we could get to heaven by works, we would be bragging about it. Now, can you imagine how terrible heaven would be if we got there because of boasting? If we got there by good works, we get to heaven one day and say, man, I'm in heaven because I gave $10,000 to the church one time. And somebody else will be up there and says, what? You got in here just by giving $10,000? I gave $100,000 to the church, right? We'd be constantly boasting and bragging and trying to one-up each other. What a miserable place that would be. We're not in heaven because of the good works that we've done. We're in heaven because of God's mercy and God's grace. But Ephesians 2:8-9 also has a verse number 10. Verse number 10 says, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Now, isn't it amazing that Paul uses this terminology of beforehand? He uses that same terminology when it comes to our salvation. We are foreordained by God's grace to be redeemed. We're also foreordained beforehand to do good works. It's not the good works that save us, but we were created to do good works after salvation as a result of being so filled with joy, and out of gratitude, we are his workmanship. So God didn't save us by good works, but he saves us for good works. So don't get the cart before the horse. When I think about God creating me, I go back to the book of Job. Job said, the Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty has given me life. Now, God is not only the giver of life, he is also the sustainer of life. You see, God transforms chaos into creation. Let me give a quote from the great theologian J.I. Packer, who's passed on and went on to be with the Lord. He says, the first thing God does is he creates. He transforms chaos into creation. God is the subject of the first sentence of the Bible. Elohim, the name for God, the plural name for God, the Hebrew name for God, is used because it represents God's majesty. It points out to God as the King of the universe. In chapter number 1 of Genesis, we see the handiwork of God. He speaks, he calls, he names, he separates, he creates, he sees, he blesses, he sanctifies, and he rests. But the first thing God does is create. The word for create in Hebrew is the word bara, B-A-R-A. It is only used 3 times in Genesis 1, and it is only used for God's activity in all of the Bible. Humanity can build and make something pretty amazing, but only God can create something from nothing, because God created all things. This assumes that all things are under his control. This is what it means to say God is sovereign. He is both the creator of the universe and all that is therein, and he is also the one that sustains it. He's the one that keeps it together. God created everything by his powerful word. God brings about form and ordering creation by simply calling it into existence. This is our starting point if we're going to talk about God's kingdom. Now, for some of you, this is not yet your starting point. Some of you want the benefits of the kingdom, but without the king. Well, it doesn't work that way, says the great theologian J.I. Packer. So the message of this particular chapter is a message reminding us that God creates us, and He creates us in His image. And because He created us in His image, when we go back to the great first 2 chapters of the book of Genesis, we discover that God created the sea and the sun and the sky and the moon and the stars. Have you watched the birds and the fish? You have observed the landscape, the vegetation, the animals, the insects, all the big things and all the little things. You have marveled at the wonderful complexity of the human beings that God created and all of their power and all of their skills. Fantastic, isn't it? Well, now, why don't you meet the one who is behind it all? As if to say, now that you have enjoyed these works of art, you must shake the hands of the artist. Since you are thrilled by the music, we will introduce you to the composer. And that's why God has given us His beautiful creation, so that we would be exposed not just to the creation, but to one who created all of creation. You see, the danger that we experience is that we will tend to worship creation more than the Creator. The creation points to the Creator. I was getting around just a couple weeks ago with somebody, and I says, if you go home this afternoon and you look in your backyard and you have a fence in the backyard and you notice that there's a turtle sitting on the fence post, on top of the fence post, I said, I can tell you one thing. That turtle didn't put himself on the top of that fence post. Somebody put that turtle on top of that fence post. When you go out and you look at the beautiful creation of God, you can't say, well, look what creation created by itself. No, somebody created it. Whenever you see a great piece of art, you say, well, somebody composed this. Whenever you see somebody put something together, whether it be furniture or buildings or an automobile, you know that wherever there is a creation, there is a creator, because the creator takes a mass of material and puts it together. God is the creator of all things, in that He took nothing and made it into something. Every time we try to create something, we take raw materials and we put them together and we kind of reformulate or recreate something out of something that was already created. But God in His creation created something out of nothing. Well, if all of this is true, if God created me, if God knows everything about me, if God is everywhere and I can't run from His presence, I can't hide from Him, He's on my present, then we must understand that we can trust Him with everything. In verses 19 to 24 of Psalm 139, David says, if only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. Now, there's a major transition that is taking place here in verses 19 to 24. After being exposed to the fact that God knows everything, God created all things, David is now getting to the point where he says, okay, if this is true, I'm going to trust Him. And I'm going to love Him because He first loved me. Now, as we look at the transition that takes place here, we discover that David is going to talk about his enemies. And when you look at perfect love, you can't have perfect love without hating certain things. For example, if you perfectly love your wife, then you are going to hate divorce. You're going to hate adultery. You're going to hate anything that will hinder that relationship that you have with your spouse. The same is true with your children. If you really love your children, you're going to hate anybody who would attempt to abuse your children. And so there's always the opposite of love. So David says, I'm going to trust God in everything. Verse 19, if only you, God, would slay the wicked. Away from me, you who are bloodthirsty. David is now saying, I want to hate the things that God hates. And the reason He hates those who are bloodthirsty is because they speak of you, speak of God, with evil intent. Your adversaries misuse your name. David says, man, I love the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. And because of that, those that speak against my God in their evil intent, the adversaries who misuse the name of God, he says, do I not hate those who hate you? Verse number 21. Lord, and abhor those who are in rebellion against you. I have nothing but hatred for them. I recount them my enemies. So David spends 3 verses saying, God, I hate those who hate you. But then in verse number 23, he has to hold this in check because it's so easy when you hate something to get that out of check. For example, when it comes to sin, we hate sin, but we look at the redeemable possibilities of the sinner. And so David says, search me, O God, know my heart, test me, know my anxious thoughts, see if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So David says, okay, now, Lord, I'm going to need some help on this one. If I'm going to hate the things that you hate, I want to make sure that my heart's right and that you test me. I want you to make sure that you know my anxious thoughts. If there's anything that's offensive in me, as I'm hating these other things that hate you, lead me in the way of everlasting. And I kind of think this in the realm of Jesus speaking about before you confront somebody with their sin, make sure that you get this big plank out of your own eye before you get that sawdust or that sliver out of your enemy's eye. David is doing it. He says, okay, before I make this judgment call on those that hate you, God, those who misuse your name, I better do some self-inventory here. Lord, search me. Make sure that I don't have a big old blank in front of a telephone pole in front of my eyes. Test me, know my anxious thoughts. See if there's an offensive way in me. Lead me in the way of everlasting life. David is reminding us that you can trust God with everything. Hebrews 13 reminds us of something. Verses 5 and 6. Keep yourselves, your lives free. Free from what? Free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I'll not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Now, this is a profound passage of Scripture. The love of money is the root of all kind of evil. How do we eradicate? What is the antidote for the love of money? Paul says here to be content with what you have. We lose our contentment because we love money. Now, money can provide a certain level of satisfaction, but it cannot be bringing about full contentment. They did a study to say, okay, at what point is enough money to be content with? Because a lot of people, gets to a certain point where money no longer brings happiness. And believe it or not, the threshold is much lower than you would think. You think, well, if I had $10 million, I'd be content. They find, no, $10 million is not going to do it. It's much less than that. They said the average person will find that money brings a level of contentment when they earn about $70,000 a year. And you think about that, okay? That's all it takes. In this year of 2024, a combined income of $70,000 and I'm content. Well, at that level, there's enough money for you to pay your bills, pay your mortgage, pay your rent, and you can live with the necessities of life. That's all that you really need. Beyond that, money no longer brings a higher level of contentment. In other words, I'm not more content if I have more things that money can buy. I just have more things. And we're to enjoy all things, but my level of contentment is not going to increase. Once I have my daily necessities taken care of, that's the level of contentment. So Paul reminds us to be content with what we have because God said, I'm never going to leave you. I'm never going to forsake you. So the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? So today, I want you to remind you, God knows all about you. He knows your habits, the good and the bad. You can't hide from him. So go ahead and tell him your concerns. God created you and he created me, so I'm going to praise him with tangible ways of praising him. And I can trust him with my plans. Well, thank you so much for joining me today as we've wrapped up Psalm 139. If I can pray for you, would you shoot me a text message at 252 252-267-2365. That number one more time is 252-267-2365. Thank you again for joining me for our broadcast today. I'd love to have you come worship with us. Hickory Ridge Community Church, 3320 Battlefield Boulevard South, Chesapeake, Virginia, 9 and 10:45 a.m. on Sunday morning. Come worship with us. I'd love to meet you. Thank you so much for joining me today. God bless you. Have an amazing day. Have a godly day. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to hear this broadcast again, you can have a free download at buzzsprout.com/1890557, or you can listen on Amazon, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast.
Hickory Ridge Community Church is located at 3320 Battlefield Boulevard South in Chesapeake, Virginia. Sunday service times are 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. We'd love for you to join us. For more information, go to hrcc7.org. And remember, no matter what you're going through, in Jesus Christ there is always hope for your heart.